Over 100 years ago, America welcomed a son of India, Swami Vivekananda, to Chicago. And he started his address to this huge gathering with a really simple but deeply unifying greeting. He said, "Sisters and brothers of America." Now, fast forward decades later, and an American president stood in New Delhi and completely mirrored that exact sentiment, greeting the crowd with "Sisters and brothers of India." It's just this incredible, powerful historical mirror, isn't it? It reflects a connection between these two nations that literally spans more than a century.
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're breaking down a truly historic speech that outlines the defining elements of the relationship between the United States and India. So let's dive right into this because, this address is not just about two governments talking past each other. It's actually a comprehensive geopolitical vision speaking directly to the people of the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy. And honestly, understanding this framework kind of gives us a cheat sheet for the future of global politics. We're going to unpack exactly what makes this partnership tick using the very framework laid out in that address. To understand this shared destiny, we're going to explore 4 thematic pillars today. First, the roots of a shared partnership. Second, forging a sustainable future. Third, upholding diversity and equality. And finally, empowering the next generation. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Roots of a Shared Partnership, looking at historical and democratic ties. It's absolutely fascinating to look at how both of these nations were born. Both the United States and India share this really profound history of throwing off colonialism. And when they finally sat down to write the foundational documents that would govern their massive, incredibly diverse populations, they both chose to begin with the exact same 3 words: we the people. It's a huge foundational tie. It grounds both nations in this fundamental belief that power flows from the citizens upward, not the other way around. And I think this brilliantly illustrates the thematic core of our explainer today. There's this beautiful quote from Mahatma Gandhi that introduces the idea of a shared majestic tree. The historical ties between the U.S. and India, well, they aren't just political, right? They're deeply personal and deeply philosophical. For instance, when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was protesting racial segregation in America, he literally cited Gandhi's nonviolent resistance as his guiding light. So we're talking about 2 massive figures in history inspiring each other right across oceans. Which naturally leads us to the shared promise inherent in both of these societies. Look, despite massive challenges and inequalities, and both have them, both nations hold up this mirror of democratic upward mobility. Think about the shared promise here. In America, the grandson of a cook could become president, and in India, a tea seller could become prime minister. So the crucial point we're taking away here is that both systems are built on this ideal, that the circumstances of your birth simply do not have to dictate the arc of your life. Moving right along to Section 2, Forging a Sustainable Future, focusing on strategic and economic partnerships. Now, the partnership outlined here isn't just a bunch of theoretical geopolitical talk. It is heavily focused on joint economic and technological solutions. This speech details specific, real-world plans where American and Indian collaborations can directly improve everyday lives. We're talking about taking data from advanced satellites and beaming it directly to farmers' cell phones to help increase their crop yields. It covers fully implementing a civil nuclear agreement to provide much more reliable electricity, and even teaming up to build brand new infrastructure, like smart cities and bullet trains. Of course, whenever we talk about future infrastructure, it brings up the complex reality of climate change. The speech addresses a dual truth here. America has a historic role in creating carbon pollution, while a rapidly growing India has soaring energy needs just to lift its people out of poverty. So the shared conclusion presented in the source material is that both nations absolutely must embrace clean, renewable technologies like solar and wind. Because the reality is, if these massive growing economies don't transition, the global fight against climate change just won't succeed. So let's zoom out for a second and see how this all builds into broader geopolitical partnerships. The speech actually advocates for updating 20th century institutions to fit the 21st century. Specifically, it supports India's inclusion as a permanent member of a reformed UN Security Council. This partnership really envisions India taking on a much larger global role, doing things like maintaining freedom of navigation in the Asia-Pacific to actively working toward a world entirely free of nuclear weapons. It also calls for these really important joint efforts on humanitarian fronts, basically utilizing their shared expertise in science and medicine to combat preventable diseases, human trafficking, and modern slavery. All right, on to Section 3, upholding diversity and equality, looking at social and moral imperatives. The really central argument presented here is that true world leadership doesn't just come from the size of your economy or, the strength of your military. True national strength actually comes from upholding the equality of all diverse groups. Both the US and India are massive societies, and they're defined by countless languages, backgrounds, and beliefs. So the speech emphasizes that guarding against efforts to divide citizens along sectarian lines is the absolute key to maintaining a strong, democratic example for the rest of the globe. To really ground this kind of abstract idea of religious tolerance, the speech recalls a moment of deep, shared grief. 3 years prior to this address, a terrible act of violence at a Sikh temple in Wisconsin took the lives of innocent Americans and Indians. This tragedy is used to powerfully underscore the shared necessity of anti-discrimination. It reinforces this fundamental truth, which is protected by the constitutions of both nations, by the way, that every single person has the right to practice their faith or to practice no faith at all, completely free from persecution and fear. Another vital component of this equality is the empowerment of women. And the core argument here is just crystal clear. Educating and empowering women is literally one of the most direct measures of whether a nation will develop effectively. You simply cannot ignore the talents of half your population if you want to succeed in the global economy, right? The speech specifically highlights the really remarkable Indian women serving in the armed forces as a sign of great strength and progress. It makes the point that when women succeed, families, communities, and entire countries are undeniably wealthier and more prosperous. Ultimately, it all comes down to a unifying question posed to the citizens of both nations. How do we treat each other? The speech challenges the audience to measure themselves by their compassion, their empathy, and what Dr. King called the content of their character. It points out that unity is found when people look beyond their differences to celebrate shared triumphs, whether that's coming together to applaud unifying cultural figures like actor Shah Rukh Khan, or taking immense pride in the moral courage of Nobel Peace Prize laureate Kailash Satyarthi, who liberates children from forced labor. And finally, Section 4, Empowering the Next Generation. Youth and the future. Okay, so here is why this next part matters so much. 35. That is the critical demographic data point highlighted in this speech. The vast majority of India's population is under 35 years old. The demographic power here is just immense. It literally sets the stage for a massive wave of future innovation, provided, of course, that these young people are given the right opportunities. Because this rising generation, well, they aren't just going to define their own nation, they are going to shape the entire world. The speaker emphasizes that prejudices, stereotypes, and old barriers really just belong to older ways of thinking. It's totally up to educated, connected young people collaborating across oceans on platforms like WhatsApp and Twitter to break down those old stereotypes and forge a much more unified global future. To truly wrap our heads around this, we have to ground these grand geopolitical ideas in a micro-narrative that was shared during the speech. Let's take the story of 16-year-old Vishal. His mother works incredibly hard at home, and his sister is at university studying to be a teacher. His brother is a construction worker, and his father works far away laying stone, sending his daily wage back home. And it's exactly because of this incredible family sacrifice that young Vishal gets to study math, watch sports, and dream of one day joining the armed forces. Vishal's story is just the perfect thematic callback to that Gandhi quote we saw earlier. The laborer earning a daily wage, the father working far from home, the young boy studying math. They are the real-world proof of that shared destiny. Their dreams are just as important and just as worthy as anyone else's. Vishal's family beautifully embodies the core promise that unites both the United States and India, this deeply held belief that with hard work and a chance, hopes can actually be realized. It proves we truly are all branches of the exact same majestic tree. And that leaves us with a pretty profound final thought today. We've seen the historical roots, the plans for a sustainable future, the absolute imperative for diversity, and the sheer power of the next generation. As these two massive, incredibly diverse, and dynamic nations continue to partner up, they really do hold the keys to global progress. So I'm going to leave you with this question. As the world's oldest and largest democracies stand together, how do you think they will shape the century ahead? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and as always, keep questioning and keep learning.